kinda coldly warm here.
Meaning what exactly?
Forget it. Coldly warm, coldly warm, coldly warm.
Okay, I'm gonna say something risky that hopefully won't discredit my habit of reviewing games, but I sort of have a soft spot for games widely seen as being bad. I mean, I'm a Sonic fan to be sure, not a Fairweather fan either, as I think there's a certain amount of charm in even the most hated entries. But to shift to a more appropriate genre, I was a huge fan of Final Fantasy XIII when it came out, and I've enjoyed Final Fantasy XV quite a lot. We can discuss those another time, but a game doesn't have to be some flawless masterpiece to be enjoyed, and I went into Forspoken with a healthy dose of optimism. Square Enix announced it as Project Athia, a new IP with not much more info. I'll check back later. When I finally got my hands on a PS5, one of the first things I saw was a splash screen for the now titled Forspoken. And it looked awesome. Weird, but awesome. And I'd be able to play it in May, or October, or you know what? Take your time. I'll get it once it's here. Well, January got here, and I almost didn't hear about the release. But after being too lazy to get around to the demo, I bought the game and decided to go into it blind, or as blind as I could. I went into the game store already knowing it reviewed kinda poorly, but remember, I'm no purist for a perfect game, and forming my own opinions is just kinda something I do. I'm really adamant about this, but I really try to go into most games, movies, etc. with as little knowledge as possible. I mean, even a friend saying the ending was crazy or the twist was unexpected is a spoiler for me, because I'm already expecting something. And ever since Kingdom Hearts 3 revealed a freaking final battle trailer, I knew even the official promotions can't be trusted. So once I know I'm interested, I just shut out until the release. But sometimes it can't be helped, and with the release of Forspoken, I knew 3 things. 1, reviewers don't love it. And 2 and 3? Well, I'll get to those. So starting up the game, first thing I noticed is the voicing felt a little off.
Wish I could go back in time and tell myself, but I was not ready to hear it.
I mean, I grew up with GameCube and PS2 cutscenes, so it's nothing that bothers me. It's just Frey's delivery felt kind of misplaced.
Haven't seen this in a while.
I don't know, maybe it's just her characterization, but to be fair, it did all seem to fall into place as the game went on, and I ended up liking most of the delivery outside of the courtroom. But getting everything set up took quite some time. You've got the New York introduction, the transfer, Janoon introduction, Athia as a whole, the break introduction, monsters, running, ruins, and a free ride to the city. That city has its introduction, jail. Since it's a video game, you escape immediately, and then there's some more setup. Now all of that is a lot, and it takes quite some time to get through, but I think it's better that it's there. Don't get me wrong, it's great to pick up a game and just start sometimes, but missing out on introductory story details can leave the experience feeling a bit empty, especially in an RPG. So I think it's great that we learn about Frey and where she comes from, and learn about the break and how it affected Athia. We get some conflict, and a reason for doing what we're doing. So even though it's a bit of a slog to do all this in your first few hours of the game, I do think it does well to set things up, and will let the player have a better appreciation for the task at hand going forward. And it's then that you're off on your own. Well, kind of. You get a walled-in introduction to the outside world, and the things you can do in it, without straying too far from the task you're given. I think this is good, so you don't get overwhelmed with the giant world that's out there before you really know what you're doing. But man, the leash is still on. I guess now would be a good time to introduce that number 2 I mentioned earlier. By now, we'd have had a lot of time to conversate with Cuff. And a big complaint I've seen about the game was the interaction between the two, especially the excessive cursing. And yeah, it's pretty over the top, and it's really out of place, but I think that's kind of the point. Now, don't get me wrong, it's jarring at times, and I think we could have done with a bit less, but I think it's important to note two things. First off, it's only Frey who does it. All the other NPCs are pretty level with their speaking, and it does lead to one funny moment when Frey refers to the corruption as
The break shit.
and Auden repeats it in reference, but they decide to just stick with the break. But my other point is that Frey is a 21-year-old from the modern world, so she's meant to sound out of place. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every English-speaking 21-year-old is cursing like a sailor, but some are, and it doesn't sound so off when we're back in New York with these thugs and their gun and the whole car theft thing. I mean, there's far more cursing in GTA, but that's not a medieval fantasy setting, so it fits just fine. Besides the words themselves, the bickering between Frey and Cuff, I kind of like, at least when it's not repeated. I like when there's dialogue throughout the journey, makes things feel less lonely. Final Fantasy XV did it great. Now make it 2 voices instead of 4, and have a lot less variety, and we have Frey and Cuff. I don't hate it though, and the back and forth to me comes off as some friendly bickering, like you and your friends giving each other a hard time. I don't know, I actually really like hearing Cuff, especially through the controller.
You can't run away from me. I am literally attached to you.
And I love how he doesn't understand any of Frey's Earth references, but he has no choice but to roll with it. And it makes things interesting that only Frey can hear him. Anyway, it's more than just the two of us, as we find Old Man Robian on our quest, who somehow has survived inside the break. Perhaps there's others still out there, just about hanging on, who I'll find in my travels. But before that, we head home, and things are really shaken up. We meet Sila, one of the 4 Tantas who rule the lands, and her madness is intense. Look, I don't condone her actions, but this game is not afraid to turn things on their head this early on, and as bad as it gets, it keeps my mission interesting. We now have a new goal, and that is tracking down the Tanta to kill her. The leash is finally off, and we get to step out into the open world. This is where that number 3 comes into play, the third and last thing I heard about Forspoken before buying it. Complaints on the world being boring. Okay, it was only one article, and I only really read the header because again, I don't want spoilers, but I knew at least one person wasn't fond of the world. So is it boring? I guess a little? I'm not sure how to quantify it. Look, I'm no expert on open world, but I think things get a bit tricky when you scale up the landmass. The more land that's given, the more you want to find. But it's not always practical to cover every inch of a continent-sized playground. I think any open world is going to be boring to an extent. That doesn't have to be a nail in a coffin, but more ground doesn't mean more fun. I think it matters more how you traverse that ground. Forspoken has this parkour dash that's satisfying to pull off. You can jump up rubble and cliffs, and dart across plains, soar over gaps, and fall without dying. So is the world boring? A little, but the way you traverse it makes it fun. It's not super visually appealing, at least not the section at hand, but it's also not just a flat, empty plain. The land has depth, and height, topography, and with the aid of this sick 3D map, we can easily chart out our course. So I've mostly just been talking about terrain, but there really is lots to do in this world. The map is littered with purple dots and yellow symbols, each representing some sort of waypoint. As an Assassin's Creed fan, and as a bit of a completionist, I am no stranger to marking and following map points until they're all gone. Forspoken even gives us up to 5 to follow at once, which really aids in exploring. I started off chasing chests, which were pretty frequent. Some have puzzle locks, but they're not really keeping you out. But after clearing out a whole province, I had to put an end to the chess game. Look, there's a 3-day gap from when I left Cipal to when I got to Praenost Castle. There's just so many dang chests, I decided it just isn't worth it. That may be the obvious choice to some of you, but when you have a completion compulsion, it's not always easy to turn away from an unchecked waypoint. Sometimes I have to remind myself you aren't meant to collect everything. So I started to open only the chests I stumbled upon, which I'm guessing is what a normal person does. But I'm not kicking waypoints completely. The yellow ones are the ones that matter. The belfry reveals more of them. The refuge lets you rest and gives you a fast travel point. Photo spots to take in the scenery. There's challenges, battles, and cats. This game loves cats, and I love that about it. There's these familiars, some street cats, and Frey's very own Homer back in New York. But these waypoints dot our path and keep us occupied on our long road to Praenost. And we have a decent sliver of the map done upon arrival. But it's time to get down to business, and we've got a big battle ahead. I've been training quite a bit on the way here. Frey's magic consists of rocks shooting from her hand in a stream, a burst, or a bash. It's actually quite fun to use these and switch between, and you can even level them up within the skill tree. It's a decent amount to unlock, but the cost was cheap, and I was a bit worried I'd complete the tree too fast. No matter, the moves were cool, and there's even some secondary magic, a landmine, an auto turret, binding vines. It's worth mentioning, I wouldn't be very well versed in this magic if it wasn't for the spellbooks. These are essentially mini combat challenges tied to each ability on the skill tree. The incentive is a further upgrade to each slot, and the result is I learned to use each spell effectively, when I'd otherwise overlook it and stick with the most powerful looking one on the surface. This is a subtle but effective addition that I'm grateful is there. Before trying out the spellbooks, I was relying on brute force, but I came to enjoy the variety in combat a bit more. But I did have a bit of a gripe around this time. I'm used to running up and slashing enemies with a sword in this type of game, and Square Enix is obviously used to creating games like that. I can adapt quite well when playing a shooter, but this kinda doesn't feel like one. What I mean is the enemies are very close range, and usually if you have a gun, your enemies have a gun. Or more accurately, if you shoot projectiles out of your hand, your enemies shoot some sort of projectile at you. Or they're a slow horde of zombies, which Forspoken does have, but they were still getting a bit too close.
That kind of magic requires more range.
I'll stick a pin in that thought though, because our big battle is still waiting inside. After carving out a significant amount of land, we arrive at the Praenost gates. Tanta Sila resides inside, the general of war who lost her marbles. It's these scenes that were the most exciting to me, to be face to face with one corrupted by madness, where any semblance of humanity is replaced by shrieks of delusion, justifying her heinous deeds. The leader who's turned her sword against her own people, one who wields the terror of the break and resides inside it. In fact, Silo is waiting on us, and it's up to us to put an end to her war. This is our first actual boss battle. I mean, there were mini-bosses in the form of mutants, or at the end of these dungeon-esque labyrinths, but Sila's the first boss that matters, and it's quite the spectacle. The only problem is, I wasn't as excited as I should have been. Besides the thrilling introduction and the cool-looking attacks, I couldn't help but feel bored with my own spells. I mean, here I am at the big bad boss, but I'm employing the same techniques as I was for this guy, or this one. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of games that do just fine with a handful of attacks, and they don't get old. I mean, I could hack and slash all day, no problem. It's just something about chipping away at that health bar and laying out traps whenever possible that underwhelmed me. But happily, upon Tanta Sila's defeat, I absorbed her powers and can use them as my own. This is incredible. I promise I didn't just set all that up for the script. I was genuinely feeling a bit of a dullness with the spells that I had, and I almost immediately got an answer to that. Sila has fiery magic that not only looks awesome, but it's even close range. This is exactly what I was wanting. Sometimes the targeting wasn't the best when switching enemies long range, but that matters a whole lot less when you're running right up to them. Those fast-moving beasts aren't a problem anymore, and the zombie hordes just feel better at close range. But let me take that pin out and return to what I was saying about the zombies getting close. They really shouldn't have had the opportunity to do that. They're meant to be weaker enemies, and I admit, that's on me for how I was weak to them. Up until this point, I'd frequently see the term purple magic, but I never really knew what that meant. I'm sure it explains it somewhere, but with the saturation of info that's thrown at you, and the dread of flipping through all these archive entries, I just shrugged it off and continued on my way. It was only with the introduction of red magic, that's Sila's spells, that it put into perspective for me what the purple even was. It's the collection of all rocky spells attributed to Frey, and increasing either purple or red increases the stats of that particular set. It's all coming together now. Better late than never. This also means I have a reason to increase these at the crafting table. So suddenly, I'm a whole lot stronger, and I get to put all those chested materials to use. Now, I feel like I can take on anything. I hadn't been able to defeat a mutant, but now it's done with ease, and my enjoyment of the combat is a whole lot better now. And the best part is, I don't have to choose between purple or red, because you can switch at the touch of a button. The long-range attacks certainly still have a use, but it's not my only option. But while I'm feeling powerful for killing a Tanta, Frey is feeling something else. Remorse. This is big for her characterization. Although she shows some goodwill, she's mostly defined by her IDGAF attitude. She's not so much interested in helping Athia, besides the Olivia incident giving her course for retaliation. It might sound obvious for one to grieve a murder they did not want to commit, but often in video games, that's all glossed over. The hero kills. He does what he must. There's no further question. Frey's shaken up, and I think that counts for something. Even better as Cuff is there to console her. No bickering, no being at odds, and we can see the bond between them growing stronger. On our way back to Cipal, we have one more ability we can try out. The Zip ability. Used to grapple to ledges and swing from these things. I wondered what these were for since I took my first steps out of Cipal, and it's great to see even mobility magic improve as we progress. I can finally make it into the Chloros Guild that I was trying at for much longer than I should have. Upon arriving at Cipal, we get a hero's welcome. The whole town's spirits are high, so I guess now would be a good time to really compliment the village. Cipal is the last safe haven for any mortal being. I don't remember if it's explicitly stated why, but possibly because of this ballow tree? It's not the prettiest town I've seen in a game, but I do like how it's set up. There's this pond area, a dump called Finders Keepers, a meadow for sheep, and a grove for crop farming, and the center of the lower city, with shop stalls and a bar further down, and the upper cities for the wealthy, a separation seen in other games, and, well, real life too. But here in Cipal, it doesn't define them too much. The architecture here is interesting. We are familiar with this tower, but it's much cooler on the outside. And the council chambers stand strong as a symbol of Cipal. But what really makes the town is the people, and I came to like the NPCs a lot. Sure, you have the minor figures, like the puppet guy, and the barkeep who's generous with the beers, and the comic relief, like the bard, and Pilo who gives us a tour. But the other characters have a good amount of depth, and I was always looking forward to what they had to say. Robian, a well-respected scholar who got infected by the break trying to find a way to stop it. His daughter Auden, who always puts others before herself, even put herself on the line to get us out of jail. Johidi, a strong, accomplished blacksmith who worked with Tanta Sila closely. She gives us everything we need to carry out the task, despite their past relationship. Olivia, who believed in Frey from the start, and in turn, Frey never forgot about her after her tragic passing. I was glad to see it wasn't just for an immediate plot progression, but Frey really is affected by her loss, and mentions her frequently. And finally, we have the Council, and I just love their unconventional apparel. And it's pretty neat how you can trace most of their origins back to whichever Tanta they have served under, and their current positions are reflective of their duties from the past. Avoalet was harsh at first, but comes to appreciate what Frey has done for them. Janesh has fought against us since our arrival, and Trihi has shown kindness from the beginning, and he continues to keep that hope alive despite the struggles around them. And all of the other interactions around town help it feel a bit more like home. And watching all the people dance and cheer, it's just nice to see them win one for once. But tragedy always strikes again. I would have liked some time to breathe a little more, but duty calls. The break encroaches further, and the blame is on Tanta Prav, the judge of Athia. We set out on mission number 2, but not to kill Prav, to gather some balo resin from the province of Avoalet. I don't have much to say on the journey there, but it is nice to tackle another section of the large map. Praenost was southeast, and we're heading more southwest. I really do enjoy looking over maps and piecing the world together, so I get a sense of accomplishment knowing another full region is just ahead. The scenery sports more greenery over the rocks of Praenost, and the enemies we encounter are different here too. Cuff and Frey have some new things to talk about, but mostly it's another waypoint extravaganza until we reach our destination, which is totally cool with me. We arrive at some balo trees, but the resin is all dried up. I do like that our mission is this, instead of a straightforward, go kill Tanta Prav. I mean, it's inevitable we'll have to do that. Cuff has said as much, but Frey doesn't want to kill again, and thinks just maybe the balo resin will solve all of their problems. But Cuff knows the reality of the situation. They find a healthy tree, and Tanta Prav's minions find them, and we head for that magnificent looking building in the distance. Just like with Tanta Sila, Tanta Prav gives us an entertaining display of madness, only this time, it's turned up to 1100. Trust me, having these scenes play, with the volume turned up at 2 AM, is an experience all its own.
I am the asker of questions. You are the answerer. Do you understand? Consort of demons!
The verdict doesn't go our way, but we're offered a plea deal. A fight to the death. And all of this is made better by the fact that I know I'll be absorbing Prav's powers by the time this is all said and done. And sure enough, the waters are mine. Now this new ability set feels a bit lacking at first. It's not as flashy as fire, or as unrelenting as rocks. It's more like a water balloon fight. But I'm sure as I unlock more on the skill tree, they'll get much cooler, and I'm sure I'll have plenty of time to master these new hydro powers. Before heading back to Cipal, we have to try out our new mobility move. Oh yeah, Surf's Up. No more slowly swimming across. This new water skiing move will surely have me looking out for lakes and riverbeds for quick and sick traversal. Though back at Cipal, things aren't so righteous. It's poor old Robian. The break has got to him at last. He went out a hero, doing all he could for his people and the land he loves. In the morning we get some friction. Auden and Frey are at odds, and although it's a bit uncomfortable, I'm happy the game has moments like this. Again, it helps it feel a bit more real, instead of the noble hero bravely taking on the next challenge. There's conflict, and reluctance, and after storming out, we head on out to our next area. Will it be north? East? Further west? And which of the two Tantas are we killing next? Who even are the remaining Tantas? It's at this point of the game, or at least in the lead up to Avoalet, that I'm catching on to the formula of the game. You know, head to this land to kill this Tanta, then some drama at Cipal. Repeat for the second Tanta, then third, and then fourth. It's a sort of paradox I've noticed when it comes to open world games, where as much freedom as you're given in the world itself, your tasks sort of become routine and predictable. That's not to say it's bad, it's just something I couldn't help but notice in any recent open world game that I've played. And it plays into this game as well, though in a bit of a different way. I'll get to that. But at this point, I have a pretty clear idea of what's to come, and I'm looking forward to it. What's the next region going to look like? What's the defining trait of the next Tanta? How's her madness going to be displayed? And what will happen to Cipal next? Full of excitement, I rush out and things kind of change. We're back in New York, but things are clearly off. It's cool to see these characters incorporated into Frey's real-world life, though it's all an illusion, and Tanta Olas is to blame. We managed to break free, and I figured that was a cool little halfway point. 2 Tantas down, 2 to go. A return to New York as a palate cleanser, and now we resume our adventure. Instead of traveling from Cipal like our previous 2 outings, that mirage we were in managed to bring us to Visoria. The area is beautiful. Everything looks so dreamlike. I upgrade the blue magic and we head for Tanta Olas. The odd thing is though, we're brought pretty close to her doorstep. Surely something is amiss. I'm already imagining what kind of twist may lie ahead. Is she not at the castle and we have to locate her elsewhere? Will we get chased out and have to flee across the land? One way or another, we're exploring Visoria, right? We get inside to find Olas has passed. That's it. That's the type of twist I was expecting. What kind of craziness will take over in the Visoria chapter ahead of us? Well, I've got 2 spoilers for you. The first is that with the death of Olas, that is the end of the Visoria section. That's it. That New York illusion and short walk to the castle is the only thing we have to do in Visoria. And that lantern gimmick that was already getting a bit stale in the illusion, that was our big bad showdown with Olas. It just wasn't so spectacular that I expected there'd be more. We don't even face off with her, just one of her minions. 3 Tantas down, I suppose. And I hardly even had a chance to train Tanta Prav's powers. But that doesn't matter much at the moment, because our powers are all but gone. Second spoiler, Cuss is actually evil and he escaped from our grasp, and took our powers with him, and now he wants to kill us, so we escape. Now this really set me off. I felt betrayed. Obviously that's what they were going for, but I didn't feel betrayed by Cuss. I felt betrayed by the writers. Throughout the game, Cuss and Frey clearly have their differences, but through it all, they work together, and there's moments where their bond is strengthened. The best example happened very recently in the New York illusion, where Cuss is the voice of reason when Frey's dealing with Olas's mind control.
Don't listen, Frey. I care. I'm with you.
That arc of being at odds to being friends is surely something we've all seen done, but it's effective. Twists can be exciting, but they have to be warranted. I mean, imagine if you played through all of Final Fantasy VII, and at the very end, Barrett reveals he was actually working for Shinra all along. Yeah, that would be unexpected. It would be a twist, but it just wouldn't be justified because of the growth Cloud and Barrett both have had throughout the game. Frey has growth. It may not be on a grand scale, since we've had limited opportunities thus far to see it, but the growth is there, and it's reflected in her and Cuff's relationship too. But all at once, the rug is pulled out from under you for a big surprise. But it doesn't feel fulfilling, or dramatic, or even epic. It just feels wrong. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one that needs an idyllic, good-feeling ending. In fact, usually it's the sadder endings that get me the most, which I won't show footage of to avoid spoilers for various games. But again, it has to be justified, and to me, Cuff's betrayal is just not that. So what's next? How will we take on our next Tanta? I didn't mention this before, but Tanta Sila is revealed to be Frey's mother just after the Tanta Prav saga. It helps us understand a bit more why Frey was abandoned, why she showed up in Athia, why she has powers, and why she's not affected by the break. It ties things together nicely and really makes it cut deeper that we know Frey has to take her out. The last Tanta driven to madness. This is what I mean when I say a harsh reality has to be justified. Here it is. The Tantas are the source of the break. They're consumed with madness and have to be stopped. Frey knew this before she knew who her mother was, but that doesn't change what has to be done. Except it does. I was expecting a difficult, heart-wrenching quest to take out the final Tanta to save Athia, but no, we get greeted by afterlife versions of Sila, Prav, and Olas, who understand what I had to do and show support. This is all fine in itself, but it feels too soon. I just took out Prav and Olas. It's awkward seeing them already. And couldn't this all wait until the very end of the game? Oh, it is the end of the game. Look, all of this here feels very endgame-like, where all things are revealed in a bit of a slowdown section with one final battle to come. But I've done like 2 things so far. 2 quests. Sila and Praenost, and Prav and Avoalet. Visoria feels incomplete, and Junoon? We return here only to immediately be faced with an endgame portal. The whole Cinta section was just this flashback revelation where we slowly regain our powers. Oh, and we have Olas's now, which I'd like to say are cool, but just like with Prav's, I've barely been able to use them. This is the end of the game already, and it doesn't feel like I've earned it. I kept telling myself, no, there has to be more. We hardly even explored the map. But no, that's it. And that's probably the biggest falter this game has overall. There's this giant world you can explore, but very little of it is utilized. Let me summarize. You start in Junoon, but you're not very free to explore. You head east to Cipal, then southeast to Praenost, southwest from Cipal to Avoalet, then you get teleported to Visoria, but don't go far. Then you're teleported back to Junoon in one specific spot, and that's it for story-guided exploration. The finale doesn't even take place here in Junoon. We've been to a few places, but that's it. Bear with me a moment, but I want to make this point clear. We don't end up going to the Far Coast Terrace, Near Coast Terrace, Crosstide Coast, Physic Garden, the Harvest Lands, Shepherd's Meadow, the Windy Hills, the Wolf Woods, Visoria and Isthmus, the Northern Corridor, Homestead Hills, Inner Visoria, Academy Hills, Golden Hills, Three Tree Mountain, the Molderings, the Path of Glory, Trout Mountain, Opal Hills, Fields of the Fallen, the Mustering Grounds, Brass Hollow, Home of Heroes, Dianthus Wood, or the Sacred Peaks. Sure, each of these places are accessible if you want to go there, but what reason do I have to seek them out? I was sure the story missions would lead me through a lot of it, but they don't. Side quests didn't help either. The ones in town are great for getting acquainted with the town itself, but only 2 side quests had me going beyond Cipal's walls. One was in Praenost, nearby familiar grounds, and the other was in Avoalet, which I found along a path I already traveled. I don't even care if it's just fetch quests. Give me a reason to go to these places. And it doesn't even have to be every single province. Some are fine to be left solely for exploration's sake, preferably parallel to important destinations we've visited. But even our Visoria and Janoon-based story missions don't even have us running through each respective territory. It's baffling that so much world was created, so many waypoints were added, but very little of it was utilized beyond explore it if you want, I guess. To be fair, there are a few founts you can seek out for their rewards, but they didn't seem worth it to the point of going out of my way for them, and again, I figured my main quests would lead me at least near these regions. So much ground to cover, so little reason to go there. I'd love to cover these areas for the sake of a thorough review, but what's the point if the game doesn't even incentivize you to go there? So let's head on to the ending, I suppose. So we have 2 portals to choose from, Return to New York and Save Athia. Now it's obvious which one we're meant to choose, but for fun, I chose the New York one first. So Frey reunites with Homer, which is nice, but they're left wondering where to go. And that's it. Sure, it's the expected result, though I feel that if you're going to implement a good ending, bad ending choice at the end, each one should feel substantial and really reflect the choice taken and the sacrifice given. But no, so let's do it the right way. So despite being in Janoon, we're transported to Cipal, where Breakgoons have overrun the city. We fight them, and this would be the perfect opportunity to really highlight Frey's mastery over each of her unique powers. Maybe some enemies that are only affected by a specific colored spell, or a boss that switches forms and you have to align your powers to his current weakness. No, none of that. Blue and green magic still haven't been used much. We clear the town and have a nice rendezvous at the archives, familiar faces cheering us on. But now we go face Cuff in his true form. There's a bunch of flashy moments that probably would be pretty cool to me, but I couldn't much enjoy them with the bad taste I'm left with. So I take out the final boss, who's fine enough, I suppose, and then the true ending. Athia is saved, Frey is royalty, and there's even some acknowledgement of Homer, which I'm happy about. It's wrapped up nicely, things have fallen into place, and all is well. And loading into the game clear save will bring us to the post-game. Cuff is back. Frey entombed him once again in her arm, and things between them are as normal as ever. I mean, he's even repeating the same lines. Though it all feels a bit awkward knowing he's actually evil and tried to kill us and destroy all of Athia, but they're back to their typical banter. What can you really do, I guess? So there's some post-game in-town detours we can do to see how life is after the reign of the Tantas. Good to see everyone's doing well. There's talk of clearing the remaining break, but I'm unsure if that's a task I can actually take on. There are a couple side quests though that will lead us out into the world, and even one that sends us to Janoon for a good bit of closure. And that's where I'm going to cut off this adventure. I'd usually do a bit of a summary at this point, but I feel I've said all I want to on it. Forspoken's a game I quite liked, but it all kind of fell apart all at once. I feel like I only really accomplished a couple things before the road to the ending, and none of it felt earned. The powers were well implemented for the first 2 sets, but I never had a chance to utilize the 3rd and 4th, and the last 2 epic Tanta battles were never delivered. While defeating the last boss just puts him at square one, right on your arm. And lastly, an expansive world was created, but was hardly used. There's still stuff I can do, but what's really the point? Guess that was a bit of a summary after all, and I really wish I wasn't left with so many negative points. Seems Square Enix still hasn't figured out the open world. Final Fantasy XV's was well utilized with its various story missions, side quests, and bounty hunts among the typical waypoints. The only problem was they couldn't contain the story within the world, and you were then on a linear fast track to the ending. With Forspoken, the world is all there, and our quests all remain within, but you're only really given 4 things to do, and there's little incentive to stray from the path. But I can't say I didn't enjoy it, and I guess that's the best point I can end on. Despite its flaws, I don't resent Forspoken. I just wish it offered a bit more. It really does feel well put together at times. I mean, this isn't a low-budget effort, but it seems like everyone lost direction halfway through. The world was done, the challenge tasks were done, the story was written, but everything else couldn't fall into place the way it was meant to. I mean, it got 2 hefty delays and was still released prematurely, a trend I'm sick of seeing continue to be repeated, throwing in the towel in hopes to break even. I can sort of sympathize with Final Fantasy XV because I know the strange and unfortunate development that it went through, but you only really get 1 slip-up on a major game release, and this one doesn't even have the namesake to support it. I just feel bad for the ones who clearly did put their heart into this one. It could have been rememberable, but it will only really be remembered as bad, if at all. And really, that's unfortunate. But I won't say I didn't enjoy it.
You really do have remarkably questionable taste.